Hi, everyone. My name is Nick, and I'm a PhD student at UT Austin, and I'm really excited to share with you an early stage piece of research that I'm currently working on with two amazing UT professors, Collis and Patricia Moravec. So the working title for our paper is Do Social Media Labels Impact Engagement? Evidence from State-Controlled Media Labels on Facebook. So again, this is an early stage project, so if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please don't hesitate to send them our way. We'd really appreciate it as we continue refining this work. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. And really the motivation for our project, or the start of the motivation of our project, was disinformation and propaganda campaigns on social media platforms. So this is an issue that started getting a lot of attention around the 2016 election. And here's just an example article from October 2017, published in The Atlantic, in which they discuss a lot of the disinformation campaigns that were on Facebook and how they could have impacted the 2016 election. This continued being an issue. Here's an example from October 2019 of Facebook still finding more disinformation campaigns, largely backed by foreign state governments, as Facebook was preparing for the 2020 election. So as this issue continued getting attention, Facebook really came out and said that they have a responsibility to start doing something about this and that they need to take steps to mitigate disinformation on their platforms. So right now I've been largely focusing on Facebook and elections, but really this is a bigger issue that spans a lot of platforms and different situations. So for example, we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and really throughout the last year and a half, there's been a ton of COVID-19 misinformation floating around on just about any platform in which you can exchange information. And here's an example of YouTube actually suspending a news account that was posting COVID-19 misinformation. Twitter was also dealing with a lot of misinformation. Here's just a very recent article, but Twitter has been doing this for a while, discussing about how Twitter would censor posts completely. So basically make it impossible for you to share misinformation or not allow you to post misinformation. So essentially the point here is that this is a really big issue that spans a lot of platforms, and they're all trying different ways to kind of fight this or mitigate the spread of disinformation on their platforms. One such way that we're actually focusing on is Facebook decided to start labeling pages as state-controlled media on their platform. So Facebook defines state-controlled media as just about any page that is largely run or controlled by a foreign government, and they're currently labeling pages as either Russia-controlled media or China state-controlled media. And this policy was implemented on June 4th, 2020, and it's going to be largely the focus of our study. There has actually been a somewhat similar study done because YouTube actually started doing this a little bit earlier, and including this the state-funded, foreign government state-funded tag on their videos. And so there's been a study published in Misinformation Review of the Harvard Kennedy School, in which the researchers found that such labels that show that a post was generated by a content creator that is affiliated with a foreign state government or funded by a foreign state government, this could be helpful in mitigating the spread of misinformation. However, the study wasn't really done on a large scale, which is something we're trying to do in this project. So in case you haven't seen what these labels actually look like, here's an example. On the upper left, you see here a post by RT, which Facebook decided to label as Russia state-controlled media. And on the lower right, we have a post from NBC, which Facebook does not label as state-controlled media. So as you can see, these labels don't really address anything in the post. They have nothing to do with the content of the post, whether it's fake or whether it's propaganda. All Facebook is doing is labeling the source of the post. So any post posted within the RT page will have this label on it. So using this as our, these posts as or this policy as our focal point, we asked the research question, does the introduction of state-controlled media labels on Facebook posts decrease engagement with these posts? So why is it important to ask these questions? Well, one, as I've already kind of discussed and built up, there's the social issue of disinformation spreading through these platforms and causing harmful societal effects. But then there's also this other side of the story, which is that these platforms are businesses, and the way that users view, interact with, and engage content on these platforms impacts the platform's bottom line, but also it has a business impact on the content creators and advertisers that work on these platforms. So how do we study this issue? We break it up into two parts. So the first is a quasi-experiment in which we look at actual Facebook data, and see whether there was a change in engagement on the platform. But even assuming that there was an effect, or if we do find this effect, it's still tough to establish kind of why this effect is happening. So we also do a controlled experiment to see if we could establish some kind of causality between the sharing activity and the labels themselves. Now, unfortunately, the results of this controlled experiment are not yet ready, but I will be able to go into a little bit of detail on how we set up this experiment. But starting with the quasi-experiment, I'll go a little bit into how we set this up. So we actually used historical Facebook posts from April 2020 to August 2020. So keep in mind the actual Facebook policy was implemented on June 4th, 2020. So we wanted to make sure that we have at least 2 months before and 2 months after the policy was implemented. And we got all of our data from CrowdTangle, which is an awesome platform that's now actually provided by Facebook. And it basically lets you download all Facebook posts from public pages and groups for as long as they're available, going way back. And we can download all post content, so all the text, the images, the links, and all the interaction activities, so likes, comments, shares, or at least the total numbers for these. We do not have access into like where the posts were shared or what those actual comments are, but for every post we have all of its content and how many times it was shared or commented on. So using CrowdTangle, we downloaded around 54,000 posts that were tagged with either Russia state-controlled media or China state-controlled media tags. And we set this as our treatment group. So we focused on posts that have links because these posts are clearly trying to spread some kind of information and are pointing users to another source that's trying to argue this, that's trying to present this information. And the links also come in handy when we try to create our control group. In that, so basically the way we created our control group was we found all of the links that were shared in these Russia state-controlled and China state-controlled posts, and found all other occurrences or other times these links were shared during the same time period, but on pages that were not Russia state-controlled or China state-controlled. So we also here I show some of the features that we're using in our study, although we will keep adding some features to this, but this is what we have so far. So the features here in group 1 are essentially just page level information. So just ways to really categorize the pages themselves that are sharing these posts. And they were created using March 2020 data. So before our study actually started. And then the second group, so treatment and post policy are our main variables of interest here. So treatment is a binary variable, which is true if the post was posted by a page that it would be labeled as state-controlled media at some point. And then post policy is true if the post was posted after the policy was implemented. And then group 3 here are just time level controls. So the day of the week or the hour that a post is posted could impact sharing activity. So we had to make sure that we included that. So the main model, so model 1 here is we're modeling shares as a function of treatment times this post policy variable plus the other controls. Essentially, and our second model here is essentially the same thing as model 1, but instead of looking at the treatment effect before and after the policy, we look at the treatment effect interacting with every month, just so that we can see perhaps if it's changing over time. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'll mainly just be focusing on model 1. So going a little bit into the controlled experiment, the way we set this up was we had users take an initial survey, and then the participants would get a fully randomized order of 3 posts of China state-controlled posts, 3 Russia state-controlled posts, and 3 control posts without a label. And for each post, they would have to select how likely they are to share the post, like the post, whether they find the information in the post believable, and so on. And afterwards, they would take an exit survey. So the way the posts were actually presented or created to users, we had 9 core posts. And then every core post we created a version of it that was a control version, a China state-controlled version, and a Russia state-controlled version. As you can see here, all these posts are exactly the same other than the tag. And of course, the page that is presenting these, since we don't want users to see a China state-controlled post and a Russia state-controlled post from the same page. So essentially, everyone would see all 9 core posts, but they would be randomly separated into these 3 categories. Okay, so here I can share some results from our quasi-experiments. So kind of the most striking and visual representation of what's going on here is on the upper right, where we view the shares by week relative normalized to the control group, which is that blue line. The gray area is just like a 2-week period, which encompasses the policy period. And then the orange is the shares by week of the treatment group, again, relative to the control group. And as you can see, after the policy was implemented, there has been a decrease in the number of times that the treatment posts are shared, whereas before the policy period, there wasn't as much of a difference between the control group and the treatment group. So on the bottom right, I show the Model 1 regression results of just the main variable of interest. And as we can see, there's a strong and significant negative effect here, which corresponds to a 6.8% reduction in sharing activity in the treatment group relative to the control group. So again, what we're seeing here is a really significant effect, but again, we're not really sure of the reason, like why is this effect happening? And we can't necessarily attribute this to the labels because it might just be the Facebook algorithm that's causing this, which is why it's really important to get the results for the controlled experiment. So again, getting the results for the controlled experiment and processing them will be one of our next steps, but we're also going to adjust our quasi-experiment a little bit by adding in additional controls that try to capture what the Facebook algorithm does. And that we're going to look at the same day and same page post frequency and share averages, which might impact how likely it is for a post to make it to someone's screen. We're going to add in page level fixed effects, and we're also control for the actual post content. So maybe looking at political slant, the topic, or the post length. And finally, we might also, there might be differences in our treatment and control group before the policy period. So we're also going to do course and exact matching, or perhaps create a synthetic control group just to get a more representative control group of our treatment group before the policy took place. Okay, so that's really all we have. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please send them our way. All of our emails are up here. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your day.